Yes. Hello, people. Another beautiful day. Yep. Hope your five senses work. Health and strength is good. Or excellent. What? What's up, gamers? Look, Tech for Gamers got some debates going on here. I seen one with people said Red Dead Redemption should have gotten Game of the Year, but in my opinion, Starfield should have gotten it. And the Game Awards is a joke, by the way. But anyway, listen to this one though. Gamers believe remakes should not qualify for Game of the Year. That is truth and that is facts. That is true, because when the game was out, when the game came out, it was qualified for Game of the Year that year. It should have never been qualified for Game of the Year after you beat it and then it gets a remake. It should have never been qualified for Game of the Year because on that year when it came out, all those content and expansions should have been out. Should have been out by then, or the following year. So you're talking about Resident Evil 4 remake. You know, that game should have never been qualified for. It should have never been in the conversation for like Game of the Year. At the time when it came out, that's when it became Game of the Year. And the year after that and the year after that, then updates and expansion should have been added to the game. Now, with these new hardwares now, with these powerful consoles now, you can expand on the environment because based on the time frame that the game came out, the hardware was limited, so the environment can only be so big. But now when you got the newer hardware like the Xbox Series X, the PS5, the Steam Deck, and all that, now you can expand on the environment. But should that qualify it as Game of the Year? No. That game, like Resident Evil 4, should have gotten Game of the Year when it first came out that year, because at the time it came out, and what it brought to the table, the time it came out, the year it came out, what it brings to the table, and how that game helped video game grow as a whole. You know, that's when it should have been qualified for Game of the Year. But to say that it's Game of the Year now, nah. The newer games that came out this generation, since we already played Resident Evil 4, that should have gotten those games should have been contenders for Game of the Year. For instance, which brings the whole Starfield situation into question too, because I mean, look, they gave Starfield didn't even get one nomination for Game of the Year. That is crazy. Starfield is a brand new game, and that game didn't even qualify for Game of the Year, and that's a shame. Tears of the Kingdom now is an expansion to Breath of the Wild. That game should have never gotten to me, Tears of the Kingdom should have never gotten now that I look at it now, especially with this whole Starfield situation. Tears of the Kingdom to me should have never gotten Game of the Year. To me, Tears of the Kingdom is an expansion to Breath of the Wild. It's not a brand new game. It's the continuation of Breath of the Wild, so that should have been an expansion. Resident Evil 4 should have never gotten Game of the Year. Starfield, on the other hand, now is brand new. Sure, there's plenty of space shooters out there, but we have never had a space shooter like Starfield, and for that game to not get Game of the Year, it's a crying shame. They should have called the Game Awards the Nintendo and PlayStation show. Starfield should have gotten Game of the Year because it's fresh and it's brand new. And one thing I hate about when it comes to Starfield is when YouTubers were talking about Starfield like they actually sat in before the game even got released, before the game even hit the market, you had YouTubers using video clips to justify their position, like they sat in front of the monitor or television with an Xbox or a PC or whatever, Xbox or PC or one of them portable PCs, and played the game. I hate when YouTubers were acting like they played the game and they never did it, and that also played a factor into letting Starfield lose some credit, didn't get the award, you know. And then another thing I think that plays a huge factor into Starfield not getting nomination is the fact that it's not on PlayStation. The fact that Microsoft beat Sony, because Starfield was going to be a Sony. If you go back to that Activision Blizzard court case, Starfield was going to be on PlayStation, but Phil Spencer was like, we need this game on Xbox, and they end up buying ZeniMax Bethesda for like $7.5 billion. So that played a factor into Starfield not getting Game of the Year, and also the Microsoft Activision Blizzard court case, where Sony tried to throw Microsoft under the bus, also played a factor. So you know, Starfield to me should have gotten Game of the Year because it's fresh and it was new. You know, when Resident Evil 4 came out, for that time, it was fresh, it was new, it was something brand new on the table. That qualifies Game of the Year. A remake should never qualify as Game of the Year. A remake can be expanded on based on the hardware that they have current, to where you can make the environments bigger. But a remake should never qualify as Game of the Year because we already played it. Whatever we got, whatever added updates they add to it, okay, fine. But that's not in the contender for. That should never be in the that should never be in the contention for Game of the Year. Tears of the Kingdom now is an expansion to Breath of the Wild. It's not even a full game. It's an expansion, and that should have been added to the that should have been added like an like an expansion to Breath of the Wild, to where you can pay for it and then play it on the Wii U. But this is just me saying that Tears of the Kingdom is an expansion. Tears of the Kingdom, now that I really look at this whole situation, should have never gotten Game of the Year awards. Should have never had, because it's nothing new. It's just Tears of the Kingdom is really nothing new. It's just a continuation of Breath of the Wild with some new levels to it, and that's it. And the Wii U fans should have gotten Tears of the Kingdom on the Wii U as an expansion to play it on the Wii U. Red Dead Redemption on the other end too. Red Dead Redemption Red Dead Redemption 2 should have never qualified for Game of the Year because the game was already out. Now the game could have gotten an expansion or an update, but it should have never been in the topic for Game of the Year. It shouldn't have. The games that should have qualified for Game of the Year was Baldur's Gate 3, Starfield, I would say Alan Wake 2. What's another one that I could think of? I think it was Sonic. Probably Sonic. Mario. No, Mario should have never qualified for Game of the Year. What else? Probably Forza Motor. Probably the Crew Motor Fest, and probably what's another game that came out this year? Spider-Man 2. Maybe Spider-Man 2. You know, Spider-Man 2. And God of War should have never been in the conversation for Game of the Year. God of War should have never been in the conversation for Game of the Year, man. So when when I saw the Game Awards, the Game Awards should have been called the Nintendo and Sony Awards, but I'm trying to think of another game that qualifies for Game of the Year. Something that's when you say Game of the Year, it has to be new, it has to be fresh, and it has to be something that's never been done. You know, so I would say Tears of the Kingdom don't qualify for Game of the Year. Now that I really look at this whole thing now, Resident Evil 4, God of War, and Red Dead Redemption 2 should have never qualified. Not even Skyrim. They can get expansion, but as far as like being Game of the Year, nah. It was Game of the Year when it came out that year, but to be Game of the Year 20 years later, nah. I mean, you can add expansion and you can improve on the environments based on the hardware that you have. Yeah, but Game of the Year, nah. Final Fantasy VII Remake. I mean, Final Fantasy VII, when it came out on PlayStation 1, the environments, they were the environments can only be so big, and there's only so much you can do. But now when you take that game now, and then you got the consoles like the PS4, PS5, and now you can expand on those environments. But to make it Game of the Year, I would say not really. It might have been Game of the Year when it came out on PlayStation 1, but to do a remake now and say it's Game of the Year when there's other new games that are coming in, nah, that don't qualify. Okay, so when it comes to this whole Game of the Year thing, the game has to be new, the game has to be fresh, and the game has to be something that we've never seen. You know? But if we've seen it before, then that doesn't qualify as Game of the Year, man. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the whole thing. So when I seen the article with Red Dead Redemption, players are getting mad that that game is not Game of the Year, or Resident Evil 4. Nah, Red Dead Redemption qualified. Red Dead Redemption 2 qualified for Game of the Year that year when it came out. But it shouldn't be Game of the Year when other new games are coming to the market, because what that is doing now is like you're robbing the new games of growth and spotlight when it comes to video games. So remakes don't qualify as Game of the Year. They might be the updated version, but Game of the Year, nah. Game of the Year is all about having having something new, something fresh, and something that we've probably have I would say probably have never seen. So like Tears of the Kingdom, I wouldn't even call Tears of the Kingdom Game of the Year. Now that I really look at this now, Tears of the Kingdom is an expansion to Breath of the Wild, and the Wii U players should have gotten that expansion. Yeah, they should have. But that's just me saying that. But yeah, but Game of the Year, man, the games have to be they have to be new, they have to be fresh. Now when a game keeps getting expansions and updates, those are just expansions and update. It doesn't make the game of the Year, because you're just robbing. What you're really doing is robbing the newer games that's coming to the market. You're robbing them of their shine and their glory, and their growth. So yeah, and or their progress. So Game of the Year should qualify. Game of the Year should the qualifications are for newer games with new ideas and that brought some new gameplays to the market. That's why it qualifies as a game of the year. But if it's just a continuation of a game, then that game needs a different award, you know. But like an expansion or an update, okay, you know, you're expanding on that game because there's more to add to it. But that game should never, that game that got a remaster or a remake, that game should never ever qualify as game of the year, because when at the time when that game came out, that's when it was game of the year. You know, but to say now that Resident Evil 4 and Red Dead Redemption 2 and who else? God of War is game of the year. That is a complete joke. It's a complete joke because what you're doing is what you're really doing is robbing the newer game of spotlight and shine and glory and all that. So yeah, that's you know, that's what those older games are doing. You know, it would be like, let me see, what could I use as an illustration here? I'm trying to think. I was going to use the older women versus younger women argument, but I'm not even going to go there. but you guys get the idea though. You know, Resident Evil Remake should never qualify as game of the year. God of War Ragnarok should have never qualified as game of the year. Okay, or whatever expansion it was getting. Red Dead Redemption 2 should have never qualified. Starfield shouldn't have gotten it. Was it Baldur's Gate and whatever new games that came out. But those games, man, Red Dead Redemption, Resident Evil, God of War, should have never qualified for game of the year, because all those games were doing. Not even Tears of the Kingdom should have qualified, because all those games did was rob the newer game. Because all those, what those games did, Tears of the Kingdom, Resident Evil 4, Red Dead Redemption, and God of War, what they did was rob the newer games that are coming into the market of their spotlight and their shine and their growth. That's all those games did. So yeah, older games should never qualify as game of the year. Not even Skyrim. Not even Skyrim should have been in the discussion. Skyrim was game of the year it came out, when it was getting all those accolades. That was game of the year. Now if you add expansions and updates to it, okay, fine. The game is, there's still some more expansion and updates to add. But that game should have never qualified. It was game of the year when it came out that year. Okay? But to say that it's game of the year now in 2025, that's a joke. The same thing goes for Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4 came out on what? The GameCube. It was game of the year then. Now to say that Resident Evil 4 now is game of the year in 2024, come on, man, stop it. All people are doing, all Resident Evil 4 is doing is robbing the newer game of their spotlight and their shine. Yeah. Okay. The same thing goes for God of War. The same thing goes for Red Dead Redemption 2. And the same thing goes for Tears of the Kingdom. Those games do not qualify for game of the year in 2023. Tears of the Kingdom is just an expansion to Breath of the Wild. That's all it is. Okay? Red Dead Redemption 2, it might need some expansion and some updates, but it was game of the year when it came out that year. Period. End of story. Okay? Same thing with God of War. Okay? But to say that those games continue, to say that Tears of the Kingdom, Red Dead Redemption, God of War, Resident Evil 4 is still getting Game of the Year awards after they just came out in what, the year they came out, that's robbery. Because all you're doing now is robbing the door. All you're doing now is robbing the developers that created the newer games, because those newer games, they need some spotlight and some shine and some growth. Those games those games, the older games should never be considered. Should never be considered game of the year. They're not even in the they're not even in the topic. They're not even the topic of conversation, man. So when it comes to game of the year should go to newer games that just came out, that brought some new ideas, new concepts to video games. But to say that an older game is still getting game of the year after it came out like 10, 15 years ago, it's ridiculous. Because that's just straight wrong, and that's just straight robbery. The video game industry will never grow if an older game is still getting game of the year awards. Then what about the newer games that came out? Just saying. So Resident Evil 4, remakes should never ever, remakes and older games should never get game of the year. When those games came out, when those older games came out on day one, they qualified for game of the year then. If they didn't get it, well, the game just didn't get it. So when the new year come around now, the newer games now, they qualify for game of the year. Okay, so yeah, and that will help the industry grow. But to say that a game that is 15 to 20 years older and is still getting game of the year awards, it's not good. It's not good. So yeah, remasters, remake should never qualify for game of the year. And Starfield should have gotten game of the year this year. It should have. Okay, but there was some. But the reason why that didn't happen now, one, because Microsoft bought ZeniMax Bethesda. That's one. Two, is because of the Activision court case, you know. And three is like the PlayStation fans, right? Yeah. So game of the year, man, should go to newer games, not remaster, not remakes. Okay. Yeah, that's just my thoughts on the whole thing. So Resident Evil 4 should have never qualified for it. Should have never qualified. God of War, same thing. Red Dead Redemption 2, same thing. Skyrim, same thing. Tears of the Kingdom is just an expansion or an add-on to Breath of the Wild. It's not even a new game, okay? Because that game is still being built off the Breath of the Wild universe. So yeah, game of the year though should never go to remasters or remake. They should go to newer games. Okay, that's what game of the year. That's what game of the year is. That's what game of the year really is. Yeah, and that's just my thoughts on the whole thing. But other than that, yeah. But I think I covered Starfield, Red Dead Redemption. I think I covered Starfield situation, Red Dead Redemption, Resident Evil, God of War. Yeah. Yeah, Starfield should have gotten game of the year. It should have. It should, because it was new and it was fresh. To say that a game that came out was in development for 8 to 10 years and didn't even get, and it's new and it's fresh and it didn't get game of the year, that's a crying shame. Yeah? And something needs to change in the game industry, okay, on what qualifies for game of the year. A remaster or remake should never ever qualify for game of the year, because a remaster and a remake should have gotten game of the year on the first day it hit the market. Okay, because it was within that year to qualify for game of the year. Anyway, I'm gonna leave this video for y'all to enjoy. Nice talking to you people again. Chris, still a Star Wars and Star Trek fan. Dark side. Go on. Peace.